Listen close now, children. Gather round this flickering fire where shadows dance like restless spirits. I'm Elder Josiah, born from them that crossed the big water in iron chains, them that knew the belly of the devil ships during the Middle Passage. My voice carries the weight of 1,000 auction blocks, and tonight I tell you about Lila Mae, a woman whose name the wind still whispers through cotton fields from Virginia to Louisiana. In them dark days of bondage, when the whip sang its terrible song and mother's screams echoed across plantations, she walked among us like a flame that wouldn't die. Lord have mercy. What she endured was worse than death itself, 'cause death be mercy sometimes. But what them masters did, that was a livin' hell, a slow killin' of the spirit while the body kept breathin'. This ain't no soft story for faint hearts. This is brutal truth, raw as fresh wounds, heavy as iron shackles. So settle your soul, steady your heart, and let me paint this memory like the ancestors painted it for me. Now listen here, child. This tale begins in 1825, under a blood moon so red it looked like the sky itself was bleedin' for what was comin'. In them days of deep sorrow, on a Virginia tobacco plantation owned by a man named Josiah Blackwell, mean as the devil and twice as proud, there stood a row of slave quarters, cramped cabins that leaked when it rained and froze when winter came howlin'. Inside one of them dark, sufferin' places, a woman named Dinah was bringing new life into this world of bondage. Lord have mercy. The screams that night cut through the thick August air like a rusty knife. Dinah gripped the rough wooden bed frame, her body shattering with pain, while old Aunt Celia, a woman past savin', whose back carried the map of 100 whippings, pressed cool rags to her forehead and whispered ancient words in a tongue the masters tried to kill, but couldn't. Outside that cabin door, Massa Blackwell himself paced back and forth like a hungry wolf, counting his future profit before the child even drew breath. Another one, he muttered to his overseer, a cruel-hearted man named Silas who loved the whip more than his own kin. Strong-backed bloodline, should fetch good money when she's grown. Sweet Jesus, they was talking about a baby girl not yet born like she was livestock, like she was cotton in the field or tobacco in the barn. That's how it was in them lawless lands. Black flesh meant white gold, and the plantation ground was soaked with the tears of mothers who birthed chillin', only to have 'em sold south when the master needed cash. When Lila Mae finally came screamin' into this world, the moon outside turned darker still, like even the heavens was mournin'. Her skin was black as polished ebony, eyes holding fire that old Aunt Celia recognized, the kind of soul that wouldn't break easy, the kind that carried the memory of African queens in her blood. Dinah held her close, covered in sweat and blood, and whispered through tears, "You gonna be strong, baby girl, stronger than these chains. But strength don't shield you from sufferin', no, sir. In them days, folks ran like shadows from danger, and danger was everywhere for black folk." Lila Mae grew up knowing the taste of fear before she knew the taste of freedom. By the time she could walk, she was carrying water to the fields where her mama and others picked tobacco leaves till their fingers bled. By the time she could talk, she learned to say, "Yes, massa," and keep her eyes down when white folk passed. The old ones warned her early. "Child, don't look 'em in the eye. Don't speak unless spoken to. Keep your head bowed and your heart hidden." Aunt Celia, who knew root work and conjure passed down from the ancestors, would pull little Lila Mae aside in the quiet of the quarters at night and teach her things the masters couldn't see. "This here goofer dust," she'd say, showing a small leather pouch filled with cemetery dirt, sulfur, and salt. "Keep it close. It protect you from evil spirits and evil men, and sometimes they ain't so different." Lila Mae learned the spirituals too, them songs that sounded like praise but carried secret messages. Wade in the water meant dogs can't track you in the river. Follow the drinking gourd meant look to the North Star for freedom. Every work song, every field holler had double meaning, wisdom hidden in plain sight. Years passed heavy and slow, like molasses dripping in winter. Lila Mae grew into a young woman, maybe 13 or 14 summers. Hard to tell exactly, 'cause slaves wasn't allowed calendars or celebrations. And that's when Massa Blackwell's eyes started following her different. That's when she learned what the older women meant when they whispered, about the nighttime visits, when masters crept into quarters and took what wasn't theirs, leaving girls broken and ashamed. But before that particular hell opened up, something else happened that tore the world apart. One morning, just after dawn broke gray and cold, a white man rode up to the plantation in a fine carriage, a slave trader from the deep south with pockets full of money and a heart colder than January frost. Folks swear on their lives they seen the devil himself that day, 'cause what followed was the kind of evil that haunts generations. Massa Blackwell had gambling debts, you see. Had lost big in Richmond card games, and now he needed cash quick. So he sold off 15 slaves, including Dinah and her younger boy Moses, Lila Mae's mama and baby brother. The wailin' that day, loud wailin', filled the plantation like judgment itself. Families torn apart, children ripped from mama's arms, husbands separated from wives. Lila Mae fought like a wildcat when they dragged Dinah toward the wagon, screaming and clawing till the overseer Silas knocked her down with the butt of his rifle. "Lila Mae!" Dinah screamed, her voice breaking with grief so heavy it bent the very air. "Remember who you is. Remember the ancestors. Don't let 'em kill your spirit." That was the last time Lila Mae ever saw her mama. Don't tell me that don't cut like a knife. It do even now, all these years later. But the real tragedy? Lila Mae wasn't sold that day. No, sir. Massa Blackwell kept her back, said she was too valuable to let go. That's when she knew, when she saw the way he looked at her like a man looks at property he means to use, that her suffering was just beginning. 3 months later, after the sale was done and the plantation settled back into its rhythm of cruelty, Lila Mae was sold too. But not to just anybody. She was sold to a man named Harlan Whitaker, owner of a massive cotton plantation in Louisiana, out in the suffering heat of the deep south where they said even the devil wouldn't visit come summer. The journey south was endless. 40 slaves chained together in a coffle, marching through mud and dust, sleeping on hard ground under the stars, fed barely enough to keep breathing. The man leading them, a paddy roller named Jeb Cross, was known for his cruelty. Carried a whip that sang its terrible song if anybody stumbled or fell behind. In the quiet darkness of them campsites, when guards slept and chains rattled soft, Lila Mae heard whispers among the men. Talk of escape, talk of killing the guards and running for the swamps. A young man named Solomon, strong-backed and powerful strong, was leading the talk. "Tonight," he whispered low, "moon's dark, we got a chance." Lila Mae's heart beat like African drums in her chest. Freedom seemed so close she could taste it. Or maybe that was just blood from biting her lip to keep from crying out in hope. But then another slave, a broken man named Cyrus, who'd been whipped till his mind went simple, started shaking his head fearful-like. "They catch us, they kill us. Better to live in chains than die in the woods." The argument went back and forth in harsh whispers, and Lila Mae felt pulled in 2 directions, hope and terror wrestling for her soul. Then, sudden-like, footsteps approached. The guard named Jeb was coming close, his boots crunching gravel loud in the night. Had he heard? Was somebody gonna betray them? Lila Mae froze, her breath caught in her throat, and in that moment, right there, at the quarters of that makeshift camp, she made a choice that would haunt her for years to come. She stayed silent. In the darkness, as Jeb Cross's shadow fell across the huddled slaves, Lila Mae heard a whisper so soft it might have been the wind. "Tomorrow night, we run. But somebody here already sold us out." Her blood turned cold. Who among them was the traitor? And would they all pay the price before the sun rose again? Look here, folk. What happened next is the kind of tale that makes grown men weep and women clutch their chests. That night when Solomon and his group tried to run, tried to taste freedom just once before they died, Cyrus had already whispered to Jeb Cross, betrayed his own people for an extra piece of cornbread and the promise he wouldn't be whipped that day. Lord of glory, the chaos that erupted. Solomon and 3 others managed to slip their chains part way when Jeb and his men came crashing through with torches blazing and guns firing into the darkness. One man, a field hand named Jacob, took a bullet in the back as he ran. Fell face first into the muddy road, his blood mixing with the clay path that had seen too much death already. They dragged Solomon back, beaten till he could barely stand, and tied him to a tree at dawn so all 40 slaves could see. That's when hell opened up. Jeb took his whip, the kind with metal tips that tear flesh like paper, and laid into Solomon's back till the man passed out from the pain. Folks say you could hear the screams for miles, echoing through them thick forests like the earth itself was crying out. Lila Mae watched with tears streaming down her face, forced to look like all the others. That's when she learned the hardest lesson of bondage. Sometimes surviving means watching your brothers suffer, and not being able to do nothing about it. Suffering so bad, it breaks something inside that can't never be fixed. After that brutal display, the coffle moved on, slower now, heavier with grief. Solomon, barely alive, was sold cheap to a turpentine camp where men went to die slow. And Cyrus? The traitor lived, but he was a dead man walking in the eyes of his people, marked by shame, cursed by the ancestors. 2 weeks later, they reached Louisiana. Sweet Jesus, the heat there was like standing in the devil's mouth. The air so thick and wet you could barely breathe. Mosquitoes big as hummingbirds, and everywhere you looked, cotton fields stretching to the horizon like white seas of suffering. Whitaker Plantation was bigger than anything Lila Mae had seen. The big house stood tall with white columns reaching toward heaven, like it had any right to touch holy ground, surrounded by magnolia trees and manicured gardens. But behind that pretty face, miles of slave quarters, cotton fields where the burning sun showed no mercy, and a whipping post so well used it was worn smooth. Massa Harlan Whitaker himself came out to inspect his new purchases. He was a tall man, maybe 40 years old, with cold blue eyes and hands that never knew hard work. His wife, Mistress Caroline, stood on the veranda fanning herself, her face pinched with disapproval at the merchandise. "Line them up," Harlan ordered, and they did. 40 souls standing in the suffering heat while he walked down the line like he was inspecting horses. When he got to Lila Mae, he stopped, studied her with eyes that made her skin crawl, made her want to run even though her feet was chained. "This one," he said to his overseer, a mean-spirited man named Dutch who had a reputation for cruelty that spread across 3 parishes. "Put her in the house first. Clean her up. I want to see what she looks like proper." Lila Mae's heart sank. She knew what that meant. The old women back in Virginia had warned her, when a master takes special interest, a woman's nightmare begins. But for now, she was marched with the others to the slave quarters. Rows of wooden cabins with dirt floors, thin walls, and roofs that barely kept out rain. The quarters smelled of sweat, fear, old grease from cooking, and something else harder to name. Despair, maybe, or just the weight of generations who'd suffered here before. An old woman was waiting at the first cabin, bent with age but her eyes sharp as glass. She looked at Lila Mae long and hard, then nodded slow. "I'm Aunt Ruth," she said, her voice crackling like dry leaves. "I'm the one what helps birth babies, tend the sick, and remember what the masters try to make us forget. You look like you got fight in you, girl. Good. You gonna need it." Aunt Ruth had survived the Middle Passage itself, was stolen from her village in West Africa when she was just a child, packed in the belly of a devil ship where folks died stacked like firewood and thrown to sharks. She carried memories that most couldn't bear, stories of homeland lost forever, of language and names stripped away. But she also carried something else, knowledge of root work, conjure, and the old ways that connected them to ancestors across the water. "That plantation ground is cursed," Aunt Ruth whispered that first night as Lila Mae lay on a thin mat in the crowded cabin. "Soaked with blood and tears. The spirits here is restless, girl. You feel 'em at night when the wind blows through them cotton fields. They moanin', they weepin', they waitin' for justice that ain't never come." Days on Whitaker Plantation started before dawn and ended after dark. Cotton picking was endless, your fingers bleeding from the sharp bowls, your back bent till it felt like it would snap, the overseer Dutch riding his horse up and down the rows with that whip always ready. Each slave had a quota, 100 pounds a day or face punishment. Fell short, you got lashed. Tried to rest, you got lashed. Looked wrong at the overseer? Believe it, you got lashed. Lila Mae learned fast, She worked alongside other women, their hands moving quick as they sang work songs to keep rhythm and keep sane. Oh Lord, how long? How long we gotta suffer? Cotton fields stretch long, but our spirits stretch longer. One of them women was young, maybe 16, named Bessie. She had scars on her wrists from where she'd tried to take her own life the year before. Said she'd rather die than keep living like this. Lila Mae understood. Lord knows she understood. But there was also Jonah, a man in his 20s, strong-backed as they come, with eyes that still held hope somehow. He worked in the fields near Lila Mae, and sometimes when Dutch wasn't watching, he'd help her with her quota, throwing some of his cotton in her sack when she fell behind. "You new here," he said one evening after the bell rang, ending the workday. "Don't know the ways yet. Let me help you survive this place." Jonah became her first real friend on Whitaker Plantation. He taught her which overseers to avoid, which house slaves might sneak extra food where the good water was. He told her about the hush harbor deep in the woods where slaves gathered Sunday nights to worship in secret, singing spirituals and praying to God in their own way without white preachers telling them to obey their masters. "Freedom's coming," Jonah would whisper sometimes. "I heard about folks up north fighting to end this. Heard about a railroad that ain't made of iron. It's made of brave souls helping runaways reach free land." The Underground Railroad. Even speaking them words was dangerous, but they gave hope when hope was scarce as rain in August. Weeks turned to months. Lila Mae's hands hardened, her back grew strong, but something inside her was dying. That spark of who she used to be was fading under the weight of bondage. Then one night, everything changed. She was sleeping in the quarters, exhausted from 14 hours in the field, when the door creaked open. Lila Mae's eyes snapped open, her heart already racing because she knew, every woman knew, what that sound meant in the dark. Massa Harlan Whitaker stood in the doorway, lantern in hand, smelling of whiskey and entitlement. His shadow fell across the room like death itself. "You," he said, pointing at Lila Mae. "Come with me." Aunt Ruth grabbed her arm, tried to hold her back, but what could an old woman do against a master? Nothing. That's the cruelty of it. You watch helpless while evil walks right in and takes what it wants. Lila Mae stood on trembling legs, her whole body screaming to run, to fight, to do something. But where could she go? The night was full of patrollers and hounds. Fight him? That meant death or worse. She followed him out into the night, past the other cabins where folks pretended to sleep but was wide awake, listening, knowing, unable to help. They walked toward the big house and Lila Mae's mind raced with desperate thoughts, prayers to the ancestors, curses she wished she knew how to speak, plans of escape that went nowhere. At the back entrance of the big house, Harlan stopped and turned to her. His face in the lamplight looked almost gentle, but his words was poison. "You're mine now," he said softly, like he was declaring love instead of owning a human being. "You do what I say. You keep your mouth shut and maybe your life here won't be so hard, you understand?" Lila Mae wanted to spit in his face, wanted to claw his eyes out, wanted to scream till her throat bled. But she swallowed all that rage and answered the only way a slave could. "Yes, massa." He smiled then, a terrible smile that promised this was just the beginning of her nightmare, and opened the door. "Now listen here, child. What I'm about to tell you is the kind of pain that cuts deeper than any whip, the kind that scars the soul permanent like." Months passed after that first nighttime visit, and Harlan Whitaker kept coming back, sometimes once a week, sometimes more. Each time he violated Lila Mae in that back room of the big house, another piece of her spirit died, and all she could do was stare at the ceiling and whisper prayers to ancestors who seemed too far away to hear. The other slaves knew. Lord have mercy, everybody knew. But what could they say? What could they do? In them lawless lands where black flesh was property and masters made their own law, a woman's body wasn't hers to protect. Aunt Ruth would hold Lila Mae afterwards in the quarters, rocking her like a child while she wept, mumbling old prayers in languages lost to time. "The ancestors see everything, baby girl," Ruth would whisper. "They keepin' score. Justice may not come today or tomorrow, but it come. Believe that." Jonah knew too, and the rage in his eyes was terrible to behold. One evening after work, He pulled Lila Mae aside near the well where folks drew water. "Say the word," he said low and fierce, his jaw clenched tight as iron. "Just say it and I'll kill him tonight. I'll hang for it, but he'll be dead first." Lila Mae touched his face gentle-like, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Then they kill you, and what good is that? No, Jonah, we survive, we wait, our time gonna come." But survival got harder when Lila Mae's belly started to swell. Sweet Jesus, the horror of knowing a master's child was growing inside you. The shame wasn't hers. No, sir, it was his, but the world didn't see it that way. Mistress Caroline sure didn't. That white woman sitting up in her fancy parlor with her lace curtains and fine china became Lila Mae's worst tormentor. See, Caroline knew what her husband was doing, had known for years with other slave women before Lila Mae. But instead of raging at him, she turned her jealousy and hate on the victims. "Filthy wench," Caroline hissed one day when Lila Mae served her tea, her pregnancy showing clear now. "Throwing yourself at my husband, corrupting him with your devil ways. You think I don't see what you is?" Lila Mae kept her eyes down, her voice steady though her heart was breaking. "No, mistress, I ain't done nothing." Caroline stood up so fast her chair fell backwards, and before Lila Mae could move, the white woman slapped her hard across the face. Once, twice, 3 times, till Lila Mae's lips split and blood ran down her chin. "You carry his bastard in your belly like a badge of honor," Caroline screamed, her face twisted with rage and something else, pain maybe, or the knowledge that her marriage was built on lies and brutality. "Get out of my sight before I have Dutch whip you raw." From that day on, Caroline made Lila Mae's life a living hell. Extra work, less food, punishments for the smallest mistakes. But Lila Mae endured, 'cause she had to, not just for herself but for the child growing inside her, innocent of the sin that made it. When her time came, it was Aunt Ruth who delivered the baby in the slave quarters on a hot July night, with thunder rumbling in the distance like the ancestors moaning. The pain was terrible, worse than any whip, worse than heartbreak. But when Lila Mae heard that first cry, something miraculous happened. She felt love. Pure, powerful, strong love for this tiny girl with light brown skin and soft curls. This child born from violence, but perfect nonetheless. Lila Mae named her Grace, 'cause if God had any mercy left in this cruel world, maybe this baby would find it. For 8 weeks, 8 precious stolen weeks, Lila Mae knew joy. She'd wake before dawn to feed Grace, sing to her in the fields when she could strap the baby to her back, whisper promises in the darkness. "You gonna be free someday, baby girl. Somehow, some way, you gonna know what it means to own yourself." Jonah fell in love with Grace too, protecting her like she was his own, bringing extra milk he'd sneak from the dairy, carving little toys from wood scraps. For a moment, just a fleeting, beautiful moment, they almost felt like a family. But folks swear on their lives that happiness don't last long on plantations soaked in tears. One morning, Lila Mae was working in the cotton fields with Grace sleeping peaceful in a basket nearby when she heard horses approaching. Her blood turned cold. She knew that sound, slave traders coming to buy. Massa Harlan rode up with a well-dressed white man, pointing toward the quarters in the fields, negotiating prices. Lila Mae tried to keep working, tried not to draw attention, but her hands was shaking so bad she could barely pick cotton. Then Harlan looked right at her, right at Grace sleeping innocent in that basket, and said words that stopped Lila Mae's heart. "That baby there, 3 months old, healthy, light-skinned, she'll fetch a good price as a house servant when she's grown. I'll sell her for $200. The world tilted. Everything went silent except for the roaring in Lila Mae's ears. She dropped her cotton sack and ran. Lord, how she ran. Across the field toward Grace, screaming, "No, no, you can't. Please, massa, please." Dutch, the overseer, caught her before she reached the baby, wrestled her to the ground while she fought like a wildcat, clawing and kicking and begging. The other slaves stood frozen, watching another tragedy unfold, powerless to stop it. The trader picked up Grace, who was crying now, reaching for her mama, and examined her like she was livestock. "Fine specimen. I'll take her." "No." Lila Mae's scream echoed across the plantation, raw and primal. the sound of a mother's soul being ripped apart. "She's mine! You can't! Massa, I'll do anything, please don't take my baby!" But Harlan just watched cold-eyed as they loaded Grace into a wagon. The last thing Lila Mae saw was her daughter's little hand reaching through the wooden slats, and then the wagon rolled away down that muddy road toward a future unknown. They had to drag Lila Mae back to the quarters. She didn't eat for days, didn't speak, just stared at nothing with empty eyes. Aunt Ruth tried to comfort her, but what comfort is there when your child is stolen? Jonah held her at night while she wept, her body shaken with grief so heavy it seemed like it would crush her bones. And in the darkness, with tears streaming down her face, Lila Mae made a vow that would change everything. "I'm gonna learn to read. I'm gonna learn everything the masters don't want us to know. And someday, somehow, I'm gonna make them pay for every tear, every scream, every child they stole. This I swear on Grace's name." In the big house that night, while Lila Mae mourned in the quarters, a house slave named Samuel, a quiet man who could read and write in secret, heard her vow through the thin walls. He appeared at her cabin door 3 nights later, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "You want to learn?" he whispered. "Then we start tonight. But if we caught, we both die." Lila Mae looked at him with eyes that had nothing left to lose and said, "Then let's die learning. Look here, folk. Time on a plantation moves strange. Days drag long as eternity while years slip past like water through your fingers. 3 years done past since they tore Grace from Lila Mae's arms, and in them years, she transformed from a broken woman into something else entirely, something dangerous." Samuel kept his word. In the dead of night, after the overseer made his rounds and most folks was sleeping exhausted from 14-hour days, he'd slip into the quarters where Lila Mae waited with a hunger fiercer than starvation. By candlelight so dim you could barely see, he taught her letters, scratching them in the dirt floor, whispering their sounds like they was magic spells. "A is for ancestor," he'd say soft. "B is for bondage. C is for chains we gonna break someday. Lord have mercy." Learning to read when it was forbidden, when getting caught meant the whip or worse, was like stealing fire from the gods themselves. Every word Lila Mae learned was an act of rebellion. Every sentence a weapon forged in darkness. Within 6 months she could read simple passages. Within a year she was devouring every scrap of newspaper, every torn page from books that Samuel snuck from the big house. She learned about the North, them free states where black folk could walk without chains. She learned about abolitionists, white and black, who was fighting to end slavery. She learned about Denmark Vesey's rebellion in Charleston, about Nat Turner's uprising in Virginia, about Harriet Tubman leading souls to freedom through the Underground Railroad. Each story fed the fire growing in her chest. But Lila Mae wasn't foolish. She knew one woman couldn't bring down a whole plantation by herself, so she started teaching others. Quiet-like, careful-like, choosing only them she trusted with her life. Aunt Ruth was first, then Jonah, then a young woman named Sarah who worked in the kitchen. Soon there was 8 slaves who could read, and knowledge spread like roots underground. They met in the Hush Harbor on Sunday nights, that secret place deep in the woods where Spanish moss hung from cypress trees like gray beards of dead men, where you could worship God in your own way without white preachers telling you to obey your masters. There, surrounded by fireflies and the sound of distant bullfrogs, they'd sing spirituals and share what they learned. "The North Star points the way," Lila Mae would tell them, her voice strong now, full of purpose. "Follow the drinking gourd to freedom, but we gotta be smart, we gotta plan." Jonah, who'd grown to love Lila Mae with a devotion that ran deeper than blood, became her right hand. He organized small acts of sabotage, tools that mysteriously broke, salt that accidentally got mixed too heavy in the master's food, fence posts that came loose letting livestock wander. Nothing big enough to bring terrible punishment, but enough to cost Harlan money and trouble. "Every little thing we do," Jonah would say, his eyes bright with righteous fury, "is a blow against this evil. We might not be free yet, but we ain't slaves in our minds no more." The other slaves noticed the change in Lila Mae too. She walked taller now, spoke with authority that made even the older folks listen. When someone got sick, she'd help Aunt Ruth with root work remedies. When folks was losing hope, she'd remind them of their worth. She became a leader without ever saying the word, the kind of person others looked to when darkness seemed too heavy. But with power comes danger. One spring evening, after 4 years on Whitaker Plantation, a new overseer arrived to replace Dutch, who'd drunk himself to death. This new man, name was Cyrus Kane, though folks took to calling him the Butcher, was worse than any overseer before him. He was young, maybe 30, with dead eyes and a smile that promised pain. Rumor had it he'd killed 3 slaves on his last plantation and never faced no consequences. The first day Kane rode through the fields, he stopped his horse near where Lila Mae was picking cotton, studied her long and hard, like he was seeing something the others missed. "You there," he called out. "What's your name?" "Lila Mae, sir," she answered, keeping her eyes respectful but her spine straight. "Lila Mae," he repeated, tasting the name. "I heard about you. Heard you think you something special. We gonna fix that real quick." From that day, Kane watched her like a hawk watches a rabbit, waiting for her to slip up, looking for any excuse to bring her down. He'd ride past the Hush Harbor Sunday nights, listening. He'd check the quarters random-like, searching for contraband. He'd question other slaves, trying to catch somebody in a lie. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late August, air thick as syrup and buzzing with mosquitoes. Lila Mae, Jonah, Sarah, and Samuel was meeting in Sarah's cabin, practicing letters by dim candlelight. They was so focused they didn't hear Kane approach till the door burst open and lamplight flooded the room. "Well, well, well," Kane drawled, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "What we got here? Slaves learning to read? That's illegal, you know. That's whipping offense. Maybe worse." The 4 of them froze, hearts hammering like thunder. Samuel tried to hide the torn newspaper page, but it was too late. Kane snatched it up, examined it with that dead-eyed smile. "This here's evidence," he said. "Massa Whitaker gonna be very interested to hear about this." Lila Mae stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clenching her throat. "It was me. I was teaching myself. They didn't know nothing about it." Kane laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You lying to protect 'em? That's touching. But I saw all 4 of you. Come morning, you all gonna face judgment." That night nobody slept. In the quarters, folks whispered fearful prayers. Aunt Ruth mixed gopher dust and hot foot powder, praying to the ancestors for protection. But when dawn broke gray and cold, Kane marched all 4 of them to the whipping post in the center of the plantation, where all could see. Massa Harlan stood on the porch of the big house, Mistress Caroline beside him, fanning herself like she was at a Sunday social. Dutch's replacement was about to make an example. Show the other slaves what happened when you forgot your place. 20 lashes each, Harlan pronounced, his voice cold as January frost. Let this be a lesson. They tied Samuel first. The whip sang its terrible song, and his screams echoed across the cotton fields. Then Sarah, whose back split open like overripe fruit. Then it was Lila Mae's turn. As they tied her wrists to the post, she looked out at the gathered slaves, all watching, all suffering with her. And she saw Jonah's face, saw the rage there, the helplessness, the love. The first lash hit like fire, the second like lightning. By the 10th, Lila Mae's consciousness was fading, her back a mess of blood and torn flesh. Then she heard Jonah's voice roar above everything. "Stop!" And the world exploded into chaos. Now you see, people. Sometimes the cruelest thing about slavery wasn't the whip or the chains. It was the way it twisted love into a weapon, turned hope into a curse. Lila Mae survived the whipping, though her back would carry them scars till the day she died. Aunt Ruth tended her with poultices made from roots and spider webs, muttering prayers in old tongues while Lila Mae drifted in and out of fever dreams. But the real wound? That was watching them drag Jonah away in chains the next morning. He looked back at her one last time, his face swollen from the beating, and mouthed 3 words that would haunt her forever. "I love you." Then he was gone, sold to the rice plantations of South Carolina, where men worked knee-deep in swamps filled with snakes and disease, where most didn't last more than 5 years. Lila Mae wanted to scream, wanted to die, wanted to burn the whole plantation to ash. But she was too weak, too broken in body if not in spirit. It took 3 weeks before she could stand upright, another 2 before she could work the fields again. And in them weeks of healing, Harlan Whitaker came back to her cabin. Even with her back still raw with fresh scars, even knowing the pain it would cause, he violated her again. 'Cause in his twisted mind, she was still his property to use as he pleased. "You think you smart, teaching yourself to read?" he whispered in the darkness after he'd taken what wasn't his. "You think that makes you human? You still just a slave, Lila Mae. Don't forget that." But she hadn't forgotten. No, sir. And when her belly started swelling again 2 months later, when she realized she was carrying another child conceived in violence, Lila Mae made a decision that went against every instinct. She would keep this child alive. Not for Harlan, not for the plantation, but as a promise to Jonah who was suffering in them rice fields. That love could survive even in hell. This time, Mistress Caroline's hatred burned even hotter. The white woman couldn't have children of her own. Some curse of the womb, the house slaves whispered. And seeing Lila Mae pregnant again with her husband's bastard drove Caroline near madness. "You think you clever?" Caroline hissed one day, cornering Lila Mae in the kitchen where she'd been assigned to work. "Using your body to secure your place here? I'll see you dead before I let you birth another half-breed abomination." But Lila Mae survived, 'cause survivors is what her people was, had been for generations. And in February of 1835, on a night so cold even the stars seemed frozen, she gave birth to a son. He came out crying loud and strong, his skin the color of honey, his eyes full of fire. Aunt Ruth held him up in the candlelight and smiled. "This one here got warrior spirit. I can feel it." Lila Mae named him Moses, after the biblical deliverer, and after her baby brother sold away so many years ago. She whispered over him in the darkness, baptizing him not with water, but with promises. "You gonna be strong, you gonna survive, and someday, you gonna be free." For 6 months, Lila Mae guarded Moses like a hawk guards her nest. She kept him close always, never letting him out of her sight, knowing what happened to Grace could happen again. She sang to him in the fields, taught him to smile even in suffering, loved him with a fierceness that scared even herself. But she also kept teaching the others to read. More careful now, more secretive, but never stopping. Samuel had been whipped so bad he couldn't work no more, ended up dying from infection that fall. But Sarah survived, and she brought 2 more slaves into their circle, then 4 more. Soon there was 15 slaves on Whitaker Plantation who could read, who understood the power of knowledge. They met in different places now, sometimes in the woods, sometimes in the smokehouse after dark, sometimes in the root cellar where vegetables was stored. And Lila Mae, holding baby Moses to her chest, would teach them not just letters but ideas, that they was human beings, that slavery was evil, that resistance was their right. "We plan," she'd tell them, her voice low but powerful strong. "We prepare. We wait for the right moment, and when it comes, we strike. But evil has a way of hearing whispers." There was a woman named Dinah, not Lila Mae's mama, but a bitter, broken soul who'd been on Whitaker Plantation for 20 years. She'd lost 5 children to the auction block, and something in her mind had snapped. Instead of fighting, she'd chosen to survive by pleasing the masters, by snitching on other slaves, by earning small favors through betrayal. And Mistress Caroline knew how to use women like Dinah. "Tell me what Lila Mae's doing in them secret meetings," Caroline offered one day, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Tell me, and I'll make sure you get extra rations, maybe even a new dress. For a piece of cloth and some scraps of food, Dinah sold out her own people." 2 weeks later, on a Sunday when most of the group was gathered in the root cellar practicing their letters, Cyrus Kane and 3 white patrollers burst in with torches blazing. They dragged out all 15 slaves, lined them up in the yard while the rest of the plantation was forced to watch. "Illegal gathering," Kane announced, his dead eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Conspiracy to rebel, learning to read, all capital offenses." Massa Harlan stood silent, his face unreadable. Mistress Caroline smiled. "They whipped everyone, men and women both, 20 lashes each. The screams echoed across the plantation like the sound of hell itself. Blood stained the ground till it looked like rain had fallen red, and Lila Mae, holding Moses who was crying in terror, watched every minute of it, burning the memory into her soul. When it was done, Harlan made his pronouncement, "5 of you will be sold. The rest will be watched constant. Any more trouble and you all hang, understood?" "Yes, massa," came the chorus of broken voices. That night, Lila Mae sat in her cabin with Moses nursing at her breast, and Aunt Ruth beside her mixing something dark and dangerous. "What you making?" Lila Mae asked. The old woman looked up, her eyes ancient and terrible. "Poison, child. Slow acting, hard to trace. You want revenge? I can teach you the ways." Lila Mae looked down at her son, then back at Aunt Ruth. And in that moment, she made a choice that would define everything that followed. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me everything." Listen close now, children, because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that separates the living from the dead, the free from the forever bound. 2 years done passed since Lila Mae started poisoning Massa Harlan. Slow and careful. Just enough to weaken him, but not enough to raise suspicion. The man who once strutted around the plantation like a rooster now walked bent over, clutching his stomach, his skin turning yellow as old paper. But revenge is a patient mistress, and Lila Mae had learned to wait. Moses was 2 years old now, strong and quick, already showing signs of the intelligence his mama carried. Lila Mae taught him words in secret, both English and fragments of African languages Aunt Ruth remembered. She told him stories of freedom, of a North Star that pointed the way to a land where chains didn't exist. Then one March evening, when storm clouds gathered black as judgment itself, a stranger appeared at the edge of the cotton fields. He was a freedman named Ezekiel, tall, scarred, with eyes that had seen too much suffering. He carried a message from the Underground Railroad. There was a route opening through the bayou, conductors waiting to guide runaways north, but only for 1 week when the patrols was distracted by troubles in New Orleans. "Freedom's calling," Ezekiel whispered to Lila Mae when she brought water to the far fields. "But you gotta run tonight. Storm's coming. Dogs can't track in heavy rain. It's now or never." Lila Mae's heart beat like African drums. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. But sweet Jesus, the risk. If they caught her, they'd kill her for sure this time. And Moses. What would happen to her baby boy? But then she thought of Grace, sold away and lost forever. Thought of Jonah suffering in them rice fields. Thought of every whip that had split her back, every night Harlan had violated her, every indignity she'd endured. "I'm running," she told Ezekiel. "Tonight." Word spread quick through the quarters, quiet-like, careful-like. 4 others decided to risk it. Sarah, who'd survived the whipping 2 years back. A young man named Jacob who'd been threatened with Sale. An older woman named Ruth's daughter named Esther. And a field hand named Thomas who'd rather die free than live in chains. That evening, as the storm rolled in with thunder that shook the earth and lightning that split the sky like God's own fury, they prepared. Lila Mae wrapped Moses tight against her chest, said goodbye to Aunt Ruth, who was too old to run, but blessed them with gopher dust and prayers in languages older than America itself. "The ancestors go with you, child," Ruth whispered, tears streaming down her ancient face. "Follow the drinking gourd. Wade in the water and don't look back." Just after midnight, when the rain was falling so hard you couldn't see 5 feet ahead, they ran. 6 souls dashing through cotton fields turned to mud, past the slave quarters where others watched from dark windows with prayers on their lips, toward the woods where cypress trees loomed like giants in the darkness. Ezekiel led them sure-footed despite the storm, knowing paths that avoided the roads where patrollers might be. They ran for what felt like hours, stumbling over roots, splashing through streams, Moses crying against Lila Mae's chest till she feared the sound would give them away. Behind them, chaos erupted. Someone had noticed they was gone. Maybe Dinah the betrayer. Maybe Cyrus Kane on his night rounds. Suddenly the night filled with shouting, with the terrible baying of bloodhounds, with torches that flickered through the rain like demon eyes. "They comin'," Thomas gasped. "Lord God, they comin' fast." "Split up," Ezekiel commanded. Meet at the big cypress by the bayou, the one with the bottle tree, go!" They scattered like leaves in the wind. Lila Mae ran with Moses, her lungs burning, her legs screaming, praying to every ancestor she could name. Behind her she heard screams, one of them had been caught. The dogs was closing in, their baying getting louder. She plunged into a creek, remembering Aunt Ruth's wisdom. Water hides your scent. Waded downstream with Moses clutched tight, the current pulling at her dress, threatening to sweep them both away. Lightning flashed, and in that moment she saw him, Cyrus Cain on horseback, rifle in hand, scanning the woods with dead eyes that promised death. Lila Mae pressed herself against the muddy bank, half submerged, one hand over Moses's mouth to keep him quiet. The horse passed so close she could smell it. Cain's voice cut through the storm. "I know you out here, Lila Mae. We already got one of your friends. You gonna make us kill him?" Her blood ran cold. Which one? Who'd been caught? But she couldn't think about that now. Had to keep moving. Had to reach that cypress tree. Had to trust that freedom was possible even when it seemed like the whole world was against her. She crawled out of the creek on the far side, her dress heavy with water, Moses shivering against her. Ran through undergrowth so thick it tore her skin, past trees draped with Spanish moss that looked like hanging bodies in the lightning flashes. Then suddenly, gunshots. Close. Too close. Lila Mae hit the ground, covering Moses with her body. Heard men shouting, heard someone screaming in pain. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities. Was it Sarah? Esther? Please God, not them. She waited in the mud, hardly breathing, till the sounds faded. Then she rose on shaken legs and kept moving, following the North Star when clouds briefly parted. Trust in instinct when they closed again. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, she saw it. The huge cypress tree with bottles hanging from its branches, their glass catching moonlight like captured spirits. And there, huddled beneath it, was Ezekiel and two others, Sarah and Thomas. But no Esther, no Jacob. They caught them, Sarah sobbed. Jacob fought back and they shot him right there. Esther tried to help and they dragged her away in chains. Lila Mae's heart shattered, but there was no time to grieve. "We keep moving," she said, her voice hard as iron. "We survive. That's how we honor them." Ezekiel nodded. "The swamp ahead. We got friends there, Maroons who've been living free for generations. But Lila Mae..." He hesitated. "You need to know something. There's a bounty on your head now, $500. Harlan wants you bad, wants you alive." As they prepared to vanish into the bayou where even patrollers feared to tread, Lila Mae looked down at Moses sleeping exhausted against her chest and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But in the distance, through the dying storm, she heard the sound that would haunt her dreams. Cyrus Cain's voice carried on the wind, promising terrible things if she was caught. And somewhere in the darkness, Harlan Whitaker, weakened by poison but strengthened by rage, was mobilizing every resource he had to bring back his property. The hunt had only just begun. Now you see, people, the Louisiana Bayou is a world unto itself, a place where Spanish moss hangs thick as curtains, where water moccasins glide silent through black water, where cypress roots twist above the surface like the fingers of drowned men reaching for salvation. It's a place white folk feared to tread, which made it perfect for them that needed hiding. Ezekiel led Lila Mae, Sarah, and Thomas deeper into that watery wilderness, following paths only the initiated knew. They waded through chest-deep swamp water that smelled of rot and life all mixed together, past alligators that watched with ancient eyes, through curtains of vines that seemed to whisper warnings in languages lost to time. Moses clung to his mama, too scared to cry, his little fingers digging into her shoulders. Lila Mae whispered prayers with every step, thanking the ancestors for keeping them alive this far. After hours of walking, when the sun was rising gray through the mist, they reached it, a hidden settlement built on high ground, deep in the swamp. Cabins constructed from cypress wood and palmetto leaves, smoke rising from cook fires, and most miraculous of all, Black folk walking free, heads held high, no chains, no masters. "Welcome to refuge," Ezekiel said. "Been here since before Louisiana was even American. This is maroon territory, runaway slaves who built their own nation in the swamp." An elder woman approached, her face lined with years but her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Her name was Mother Keturah, and she'd been born free in this very settlement, daughter of runaways from the 1790s. "You safe here," she said, her voice carrying authority. "Patrollers tried to find us for 50 years. They all either turned back or never came out. The bayou protects its own." Lord have mercy. For the first time in her life, Lila Mae felt something like safety. They gave her a cabin, small but dry, with a real bed and a door that locked from the inside. They gave her food that wasn't scraps, clothes that fit proper, and most precious of all, they gave her respect. "You a free woman now," Mother Keturah told her. "Act like it." Days turned to weeks in refuge. Lila Mae learned the ways of maroon life, how to fish with nets woven from vines, how to navigate the swamp by reading the trees and water, how to disappear into the wilderness when strangers approached. She taught Moses to walk on the raised paths between cabins, to recognize the call of the night heron that signaled danger, to understand that freedom wasn't just a dream. It was something you could touch and live. Sarah found work helping with the children, teaching them the letters she'd learned on the plantation. Thomas became a fisherman, his powerful, strong arms perfect for poling the flat-bottomed boats through shallow waters. And Lila Mae? She discovered she had a gift for healing, learning from the settlement's root doctor, an ancient man named Papa Solomon who knew plants and remedies that could cure almost anything. "You got the touch," Papa Solomon said one day as they gathered herbs. "The ancestors speak through your hands." Lila Mae felt peace for the first time in memory. She'd wake with Moses beside her, free of the fear that he'd be sold away. She'd spend days learning healing arts, nights singing spirituals around the fire with other free souls. And slowly, so slowly, the wounds on her back and in her heart began to heal. Then one evening, 3 months into their stay, something miraculous happened. A new group of runaways arrived, guided by Underground Railroad conductors, and among them, barely alive, skeletal thin, covered in scars from rice field labor, was Jonah. Lila Mae saw him and couldn't believe her eyes. "Jonah? Sweet Jesus, is that really you?" He collapsed at her feet, too weak to stand. She held him while he wept, felt his bones through his skin, saw the damage them rice fields had done. But he was alive. Against all odds, he'd survived and made it to freedom. "Thought I'd never see you again," he whispered. "Thought I'd die in them swamps. But I kept your face in my mind, kept your voice in my heart, and it carried me through." For weeks, Lila Mae nursed Jonah back to health with Papa Solomon's remedies and her own fierce determination, fed him bone broth and healing teas, dressed his wounds, sang to him when nightmares made him cry out. And Moses, precious Moses, took to Jonah like he'd found the father he never knew he was missing. "This is home now," Jonah said one night as they sat by the water, watching fireflies dance above the bayou. "We could stay here, raise Moses, live free. Ain't that what we always wanted?" It was. God knows it was. But something in Lila Mae wouldn't settle. She thought about Aunt Ruth still in bondage, about the others who couldn't run, about Grace sold away and lost forever. She thought about Harlan Whitaker, probably recovered from his poisoning by now, still violating women, still breaking families. "Freedom ain't just for us," she told Jonah. "It's for all our people. And as long as slavery exists, we ain't truly free. We just hidin'." Before he could respond, a messenger arrived, one of the scouts who watched the edges of the swamp for danger. His face was grave. "Mother Keturah," he called out. "We got trouble. White men at the eastern edge. More than we ever seen before. 20 riders, maybe 30. They got dogs and they offering money to anyone who will guide them in." "Who they looking for?" Keturah demanded. The scout looked directly at Lila Mae. "Woman named Lila Mae and her son. $500 bounty and leading them." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Is Massa Harlan Whitaker himself?" The settlement went silent. Everyone knew what this meant. Harlan had come personally, which meant he wouldn't stop till he got what he wanted. And with that much money, there was always the risk someone would betray them for the reward. Lila Mae stood, her spine straight, her voice steady. "I won't bring danger to y'all. We'll leave tonight." "No," Jonah said, struggling to stand despite his weakness. "We fight. We protect our home." "He's right," Mother Keturah agreed. "Refuge has stood for 60 years. We don't run from white men. We make them run from us." That night, as the settlement prepared for battle, sharpening spears, loading old muskets, laying traps in the swamp, a letter arrived by secret messenger. It was from the plantation smuggled out by house slaves loyal to Lila Mae. She read it by lamplight, and her blood turned to ice. "Look here, folk. There are moments in life when your soul splits in two, when every choice leads to suffering, and there ain't no right answer, just different kinds of pain." Lila Mae sat in her cabin holding that letter, tears streaming down her face, while Jonah and Mother Keturah argued over what to do. "It's a trap," Jonah insisted, his voice desperate. "You go out there, he'll kill you and keep both children." "But Grace is alive," Lila Mae whispered. "My baby girl that I ain't seen in 6 years is out there scared and alone. How can I not go to her?" Mother Keturah studied the letter with ancient, knowing eyes. "Evil men always know the one thing that'll break you. Harlan found yours. But child, listen to me now. You got Moses here, alive and free. You go out there, you condemn him to slavery too." The weight of that truth pressed down on Lila Mae like the earth itself was crushing her chest. She looked at Moses sleeping peaceful on the bed, innocent of the terrible choice his mama faced. Then she closed her eyes and did something she hadn't done since she was a girl. She prayed for guidance, not to the Christian God forced on slaves by white preachers, but to the ancestors, to the Orishas, to the spirits of all who'd suffered before her. And in that moment of stillness, she heard Aunt Ruth's voice clear, as if the old woman stood beside her. "Smart warrior don't walk into enemy traps. She sets her own." Lila Mae's eyes snapped open. "We don't surrender. We attack." For the next 3 hours, as dawn approached, they planned. The Maroons knew every inch of that swamp, where the ground was solid, where it would swallow a man whole, where gators nested and snakes hunted. They knew how to move silent through water, how to use mist and shadow as weapons, how to make the bayou itself fight for them. "Harlan think he huntin' us," Lila Mae said, her voice hard as iron. "But we gonna be the hunters." 20 Maroon warriors, men and women both, prepared for battle. They covered themselves in mud to hide their scent from dogs, armed themselves with spears, knives, old rifles, and most deadly of all, their knowledge of the land. Papa Solomon prepared special powders, hot foot powder to scatter where enemies walked, gopher dust to curse their weapons, mixtures that would make dogs go crazy with fear. Just before dawn, they moved out. Lila Mae left Moses with Sarah, kissing his forehead one last time. "If I don't come back," she told her friend, "you raise him free. You teach him his mama died fighting, not begging." The Maroon warriors split into groups, circling around to where Harlan's camp was reported to be. Lila Mae went with the main group led by Mother Keturah, while Jonah, still weak but determined, went with the flankers who'd attack from the sides. They found the camp at a clearing near the bayou's edge. 30 white men, dozens of dogs, weapons and supplies for a long hunt. And there, tied to a tree like an animal, was a little girl with skin the color of honey and eyes that Lila Mae recognized even after 6 years. Grace, her firstborn, alive but terrified. Harlan Whitaker stood in the center of camp, looking sickly but filled with bitter determination. Beside him was Cyrus Kane, that dead-eyed overseer who loved cruelty more than breathing. They was organizing the men, preparing to enter the swamp at first light. "Soon as that slave wench sees her daughter," Harlan was saying, "she'll come running, and when she does, we take them both. $500 for the mother, $200 for the boy if we find him, and this one," he gestured at Grace, "she's already paid for." Lila Mae's blood boiled. She gave the signal. Hell erupted from every direction. Spears flew from the undergrowth, dropping 3 men before they could grab their guns. The Maroons had scattered Papa Solomon's powders on the ground, and the dogs suddenly went wild, turning on their handlers, foaming at the mouth, running in circles like they'd gone mad. "Ambush!" Kane screamed, firing blindly into the mist. The battle was chaos. Gunshots exploding, men screaming, the swamp itself seeming to come alive with fury. Maroon warriors moved like ghosts, striking from the shadows, then vanishing before enemies could react. They used the terrain perfect, leading pursuers into quicksand, into gator nests, into places where cypress roots caught feet and water swallowed the unwary. Lila Mae fought like a woman possessed, a knife in each hand, cutting down a slave catcher who tried to grab her. She moved toward Grace, her heart pounding, but Cyrus Kane blocked her path. "Thought you could run from me?" he snarled, raising his pistol. "Thought you could—" His words cut off as Jonah crashed into him from the side, knocking the gun away. The 2 men struggled in the mud, Jonah's hands wrapping around Kane's throat despite his weakened state. But Kane was stronger, viciously trained, and he reversed the hold, pressing Jonah's face into the swamp water. Lila Mae screamed and threw her knife. It caught Kane in the shoulder, making him release Jonah. The overseer spun toward her, rage twisting his features into something barely human, and then Mother Keturah's spear took him in the chest. He fell backwards into black water and didn't rise. But the victory cost them. Jonah lay gasping, wounded from the fight. 3 Maroon warriors was dead, 5 more injured, and Harlan had grabbed Grace, pressing a pistol to the child's head as he backed toward the remaining horses. "Stop!" he screamed. "Stop or I kill her right now." The battle froze. Everyone, Maroon and slave catcher alike, went still. Lila Mae locked eyes with her daughter across 20 feet of blood-soaked ground. Grace's lips moved, forming a single word. "Mama." "Let her go," Lila Mae said, her voice steady though her heart was breaking. "Take me instead, I'll come willing. Just let the child go free." Harlan laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "You think I'm a fool? I keep the girl as insurance till we're far from this cursed swamp. You want her? You chase me. You want her to live? You watch me ride away and pray I keep my word." In that moment, Lila Mae faced the choice that would haunt her forever: pursue Harlan and risk Grace's life in a desperate chase, or let them go and trust that somehow, someday, she'd find her daughter again. She looked at Jonah lying wounded, at the Maroon dead and dying, at Mother Keturah waiting for her decision. Then she looked at Grace, memorizing every detail of her daughter's face, and made her choice. "Let them go," she said quietly. "We got our wounded to tend." Harlan's shock was visible. He'd expected pursuit, but he didn't waste the opportunity. He mounted up with Grace. The remaining slave catchers grabbed their dead and wounded, and they rode hard for the edge of the swamp. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Sarah approached with terrible news. "Lila Mae. Moses is gone. In the confusion, someone took him. One of the slave catchers who slipped past our lines." The world tilted. Both her children, both of them, stolen in the same battle. Lila Mae fell to her knees in the bloody mud, a sound ripping from her throat that was half scream, half prayer. She'd sacrificed everything for freedom and lost everything in the process. Jonah crawled to her, blood leaking from a dozen wounds. "We find them," he gasped. "Both of them. I swear on my life we get them back." But Mother Keturah's face was grave as she helped them both up. "White man's law coming now. That much gunfire, that many dead? They'll bring the militia. Refuge ain't safe no more. Listen close now, children, 'cause this is where the story turns from running to fighting, from surviving to striking back with holy fury." Lila Mae and Jonah had 3 days to reach New Orleans before Grace and Moses was sold on that cursed auction block. 3 days to cross dangerous territory, avoid patrols, and somehow infiltrate the biggest slave market in the South. They traveled hard and fast, guided by Underground Railroad contacts who moved them through safe houses and secret routes. Mother Keturah had given them papers, forged freedom documents that might fool a casual inspection, and clothes that made them look like hired servants rather than runaways. But every minute felt like an eternity, every delay a knife in the heart. "We ain't gonna make it in time," Jonah said on the second night, his body still weak from the bayou battle. "Even if we do, how we gonna get 2 children out of a guarded auction house?" Lila Mae's eyes held a fire that burned hotter than any plantation sun. "We don't steal them from the auction. We make sure the auction never happens." In New Orleans, that wicked, beautiful city where French, Spanish, African, and American cultures mixed like a powerful conjure, they found allies. Free people of color who hated slavery, abolitionists who worked in secret, even some white folk whose conscience wouldn't let evil stand unchallenged. And they found Marie Laveau herself, the legendary voodoo queen who held more power in her little finger than most men held in their whole bodies. Marie listened to Lila Mae's story in her cottage behind Congo Square, surrounded by candles and herbs and symbols that spoke of African power preserved across the terrible water. When Lila Mae finished, the voodoo queen nodded slow. "You carry ancestor strength," Marie said, her voice like honey and thunder mixed. "I see it in your eyes. You a warrior woman, marked by suffering but not broken. I help you, but know this. What you planning gonna cost blood. Maybe yours, maybe others. You ready for that?" "I've been ready since the first time they stole my child," Lila Mae answered. The plan was dangerous, maybe impossible, but it was all they had. The auction house was owned by a man named Claudius Boudreaux, cruel and rich, who'd built his fortune on black suffering. Harlan had brought Grace and Moses there personally, advertising them as premium stock, light-skinned children who'd fetch high prices. Marie's network infiltrated the auction house. A free black man named Jacques who worked as a porter, a Creole woman named Celestine who cooked for Boudreaux, a white abolitionist named Father Michaels who ministered to the condemned, each one ready to risk everything for justice. On the day before the auction, Lila Mae walked into that house of horrors disguised as a servant, papers in hand, heart pounding like African drums. She saw the pens where humans was kept like cattle, heard the cries of mothers separated from children, smelled the stench of despair that clung to every wall. And there, in a small cell near the back, she found them. Grace and Moses huddled together, the older sister protecting her little brother she'd only just met. When Grace looked up and saw Lila Mae, recognition flashed in her eyes despite 6 years of separation. "Mama," she whispered like she didn't dare believe it. Lila Mae wanted to grab them right then, wanted to run, but guards was everywhere. Instead, she pressed her face to the bars and whispered fast, "Tomorrow, when you smell smoke, when you hear screams, you run west toward the river, you'll find a woman in a red scarf. That's Celestine. She take you to safety. You understand?" Grace nodded, covering Moses' ears so he wouldn't be scared. "I understand, Mama. We be ready." That night, the conspirators gathered in Marie Laveau's cottage. Jonah, still weak but determined. Jacques with his knowledge of the building. Celestine with access to the kitchen. Father Michaels with his moral certainty. And Lila Mae, who'd been transformed by suffering into something stronger than chains could hold. "The auctions start at noon," Jacques explained. "But they're a problem. Harlan's staying in the building overnight, guarding his investment personal-like. And Boudreaux got private guards, armed men who ain't afraid to kill. Then we kill first," Lila Mae said quietly, and everyone went silent at the coldness in her voice. Marie handed her a small bottle. "This here is more than poison. It's justice in liquid form. Few drops in their morning coffee, and they won't be troubling nobody come noon." The plan unfolded like a prayer to angry gods. Before dawn, Celestine laced the guards' breakfast with enough sleeping powder to drop a horse. Lila Mae, dressed as a cleaning woman, entered Harlan's room while he slept and stood over the man who'd violated her, beaten her, stolen her children. She could have killed him then. Sweet Jesus, how she wanted to. But death was too easy. Instead, she took the poison Marie had given her and mixed it in the water pitcher by his bed. Slow acting, painful, the kind that would make him suffer for days before the end came. But Mistress Caroline, who'd traveled with Harlan, woke, and saw Lila Mae standing there. The white woman's scream pierced the pre-dawn silence, and suddenly guards who hadn't drunk the poisoned coffee was running, and everything went to chaos. Jonah set fires in 3 places: the storage room, the stable, the auction platform itself. Flames leaped high, spreading fast through the old wooden building. Bells started ringing, people screaming, smoke filling hallways. In the confusion, Jacques opened the slave pens. Dozens of enslaved people, men, women, children who'd been scheduled for sale, poured out into the streets, running for their lives while New Orleans burned behind them. Lila Mae fought through smoke and flames toward the cell where Grace and Moses waited. A guard blocked her way and she didn't hesitate. She had a knife, and she used it. Then another guard, and another till her hands was covered in blood and she didn't care because her children was behind that locked door. She found the keys on a dead guard's belt, opened the cell, and Grace stumbled out carrying Moses. "Run!" Lila Mae screamed. "West! Find Celestine!" But Harlan appeared through the smoke, his face twisted with rage and recognition. "You!" he snarled, pulling a pistol. "You did this!" Jonah crashed into him from the side before he could fire, and the 2 men fought brutal and desperate, while flames consumed the building around them. Lila Mae pushed her children toward safety, then turned back to help Jonah. She saw Harlan get the upper hand, saw him raise the pistol toward Jonah's head, and she screamed a word of power that Marie Laveau had taught her, an old African word that called down judgment. Whether it was magic or coincidence, in that moment a burning beam fell from the ceiling and crashed down on Harlan Whitaker, pinning him to the ground. He screamed in agony as the flames began to consume him, and Lila Mae stood over him one last time. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice cold as winter frost. "Now you pay in fire and pain. May the ancestors judge you for your sins." Then she and Jonah ran, leaving Harlan to burn with the auction house that had stolen so many souls. They emerged from the inferno into a New Orleans street filled with chaos, enslaved people running for freedom, citizens fighting fires, guards confused and overwhelmed. Celestine appeared with Grace and Moses, both children terrified but alive. "The river," she gasped. "Boat waiting to take you north, but you gotta go now." As they ran through streets slick with rain that had started to fall like heaven itself was washing away the sins of that cursed place. Lila Mae heard a voice behind her, weak, broken, but unmistakable. She turned and saw Harlan, somehow crawled from the flames. His body burned terrible, but his hate keeping him alive. He raised a pistol with a shaking hand, aimed at Moses, and Lila Mae knew she had one choice left to make. "Now listen here, child. This is where the story reaches its end. Not a happy ending, 'cause there ain't no truly happy endings when you talking about slavery. But an ending nonetheless. One that carries both victory and scars, both freedom and loss." Lila Mae saw Harlan raise that pistol toward Moses, saw the hatred in his burning eyes, and she didn't think, she just moved. Threw herself in front of her son as the gun fired, felt the bullet tear through her shoulder, spun and fell hard to the rain-slicked cobblestones. Before Harlan could fire again, Jonah was on him. This time there was no mercy, no hesitation. Jonah's hands, those powerful, strong hands that had picked cotton and carried burdens and held Lila Mae through nightmares, closed around Harlan's throat and squeezed till the white man's struggles ceased, and his eyes went empty as his soul. "Is he dead?" Lila Mae gasped, clutching her bleeding shoulder while Grace and Moses huddled beside her. "He dead," Jonah confirmed, his voice flat. "And may God forgive me, but I ain't sorry." They had no time to rest. Celestine got them to the river where a steamboat captain, a German immigrant who hated slavery on principle, had agreed to hide them in cargo holds headed north. For 3 days they traveled in darkness, Grace and Moses pressed against their mama, Jonah tending Lila Mae's wound with supplies Marie Laveau had sent. "We made it," Grace whispered one night, her voice full of wonder. "We really escaping?" But Lila Mae knew better. Sweet Jesus, she knew better. Freedom wasn't just about escaping, it was about what you carried with you after. The scars on her back, the memories of Aunt Ruth and all those left behind. The knowledge that even in the North, black folk wasn't truly safe. They reached Ohio, free soil, 2 weeks later. The Underground Railroad network placed them in a small community of escaped slaves outside Cincinnati, where they could start fresh. Jonah found work as a blacksmith, his hands finally building instead of destroying. Grace enrolled in a secret school where free black children learned to read and write. And Moses, precious Moses, grew up knowing he was free, though the nightmares from his brief captivity would haunt him for years. Lila Mae became something she never expected, a speaker, a witness, a voice for the voiceless. Abolitionists asked her to tell her story at meetings, and she did, though it tore her heart open every time. She spoke of the Middle Passage her ancestors endured, of the auction block where families was shattered, of the whip and the rape and the endless suffering. She spoke of resistance too, of Aunt Ruth's wisdom, of the slaves who learned to read in secret, of the poison and fire that brought justice when law wouldn't. One evening, 5 years after their escape, Lila Mae stood before a packed meeting hall in Boston, telling her truth to white folks who'd never known bondage. When she finished, a young black man approached her, barely 20 years old with fire in his eyes. "My name is Frederick," he said. "Frederick Douglass. Your story. It needs to be written down, preserved. The world needs to hear what you survived." And so it was. Lila Mae's testimony joined others in the great chorus of voices demanding freedom, pushing America toward the reckoning that would come in 1861 when war finally broke the chains. But the cost stayed with her always. At night, she'd wake from dreams of Aunt Ruth still in bondage, of Jacob shot dead in his flight, of Esther dragged back to slavery, of all the others who didn't make it. She'd think of Harlan burning and feel no satisfaction, only emptiness. Revenge hadn't healed her. Freedom had, but it was a freedom purchased with blood and tears. Jonah understood. He'd hold her on those dark nights and whisper, "We survived. That's what matters. We survived and we kept our children free." Grace grew into a teacher, educating young black children and passing down the lessons her mama taught her. Moses became a conductor on the Underground Railroad himself, guiding others to freedom like Ezekiel once guided them. And Lila Mae, she lived to see the Civil War, lived to see the Emancipation Proclamation, lived to see chains broken across the South. In 1865, when the war ended and slavery was abolished, Lila Mae was 60 years old, her body worn from decades of struggle. She stood in the town square of that Ohio community, surrounded by folks who'd escaped bondage, and wept, not from joy alone, but from the weight of all who hadn't lived to see this day. "Aunt Ruth," she whispered to the sky, "Samuel, Jacob, Esther, all of you who died in chains, we did it, we broke free. I hope you restin' now." Years later, when Lila Mae's body finally gave out and her spirit prepared to join the ancestors, Grace and Moses sat by her bedside. She looked at them, these children born from violence but raised in freedom, and smiled. "You carry the memory forward," she told them. "You tell your children and they tell theirs. Tell them we suffered but we wasn't broken. Tell them we was stolen from Africa, chained in ships, sold like cattle, beaten, raped, murdered, but we survived. Tell them our spirits is stronger than any chain, our voices louder than any whip. Tell them freedom ain't free. It's paid for in blood and tears and the courage of folks who said no more." She died peaceful in 1870, surrounded by family. Her last words a prayer in a language older than English, older than America, old as Africa itself. They buried her in free soil, under an oak tree where Spanish moss didn't hang like ghosts, but rustled gentle in the wind. And on her headstone, carved deep, was this: Lila Mae survived the Middle Passage's legacy, resisted the whip, freed her children, spoke her truth, may her voice echo forever. Now, children, as I finish this story, as Elder Josiah closes the circle where we began, know that Lila Mae represents millions who suffered, thousands who resisted, hundreds who escaped. Her story is their story, her pain their pain, her triumph their triumph. The auction blocks are gone now, torn down and turned to dust. The slave quarters burned or rotted away. The plantations crumbled. But the memory? That lives on. It lives in the descendants who carry slave names and plantation scars in their family trees. It lives in the trauma passed down through generations. It lives in the ongoing fight for justice, equality, and true freedom. Those who suffered, suffered. Those who resisted left memory behind. And memory is what we keep here, in the files of slavery. The chains may be gone, but the voices remain, whispering through cotton fields turned into parking lots, through auction blocks now marked with plaques, through rivers that still carry the tears of the Middle Passage. Listen close, and you'll hear them. The ancestors calling us to remember, to honor, to never forget what was endured so we could breathe free. This ain't just history, children. This is living memory, sacred truth, holy testimony. Pass it on, keep it alive. Let the voices echo forever in the files of slavery.